Okay, it says we're live. 2 minutes late. Apologies, my fault. Certainly not my guest Vimal. We're going to give everybody a minute or so to join up. But if you were looking to learn how to program in a mob, or why your engineers might want to do that, or what on earth Vimal and I are talking about when we talk about mob programming, you don't need to know a single thing about programming to learn a lot here. This is the Squirrel Squadron, where tech and non-tech people get together. So let's launch in and chat about that in a couple minutes. Let me do brief introduction activities first. The first is to mention there is a recording of this, so it'll be here on the same platform you're using. You can always come back and watch on YouTube and LinkedIn and so on. And also, there's a forum from the Squirrel Squadron. That's actually where I contacted Vimal and said, hey, Vimal, you were talking in one of our events about this mob programming thing. Would you come tell us about it? Because I don't know so much. So I'm going to be learning right along with you guys. So on that forum, we're discussing topics like how to deal with an overly tactical colleague when an engineer is really just writing code all day and not being strategic, how to handle elephant carpaccio, how to deliver quickly, how to get software out every day when it's not so visible. And I just posted something about how to attract fantastic product people. So these are the sorts of topics that we discuss. Hardcore tech, as soft as you can think, how to market your technology, how to use your technology team most effectively, everywhere in between. So come along to the Squirrel Squadron. That's squirrelsquadron.com, and you can find all that good stuff, including also weekly events like this one. So in a couple weeks, we're doing one on how to lead geeks. So if you're not an engineer, if you're not a geeky, nerdy person, how do you take care of people like us? What do you do to keep us happy and keep us being productive? There's a lot you can do without having to write any lines of code or know what a bit is or a byte. Also, I'm in Krakow in Poland in middle of May, and I'm going to be giving a keynote speech there on why you don't need stuff like Scrum. So if you're confused by Scrum or find it not so helpful, or you think, man, nobody ever seems to get anything done in these sprints, that's a good one. Whether or not you can come to Krakow, you can sign up and get the recording. Cool. So let me start, because I think we have a quorum now. Let me start by asking the group, while I'm introducing Vimal and talking a little bit about him and letting him say more about himself, would everybody who's here please give me a quick note in the chat, just write something there that tells us why you're here. Is it because you've tried mob programming and you want to learn more about it? Is it because you hate mob programming, you've tried it, or your team has tried it and you're really confused by it, or something like that? Is it because you have no idea what it is and you want to learn all about it? What brought you here? So that way Vimal and I can discuss the right topics. And I should say, we love it when you interrupt. So please come in and say things and ask us questions. This will be a short session, which is fine if you don't have much to say. But as I always say in all of these events, whoever my guest might be, we're going to do much better if we answer your questions. So please fire them at us as we go. Vimal is a member of my community and has been for at least 6 months, if not more, I think, and active on the forums, has come to several events. And at one of those events, I don't even remember which one, he piped up and he said, we're doing this crazy thing called mob programming. And you said you've been doing it both in I think you said an open source community, building an open source tool, and also in your day-to-day work as a consultant and in your technical team. And I said, man, Vimal, you have all this knowledge, and you shared a whole lot with us on the forum. And I said, we should do more on this because the community is obviously interested. So Vimal, thanks so much for coming. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to be talking to us about this? What sorts of things do you do day to day? And how did you come to mob programming?
Thank you, Spira. So I kind of came across mob programming a year ago, basically. So my background, I used to be a CTO until 2019. And after 2019, I kind of became a consultant. So now I'm working with a number of startups, helping them deliver the product essentially, and going through from ideation to all the way to the execution and the delivery. And in that
Same
process,
path as me. I got bored doing things for the same company, so now I do it for many. I think you had the same experience.
Yeah. So in that process, you meet quite a lot of people and come across a number of problems. And one of the problem I kind of always face was I call it pull request hell. So you over the period, everybody creates a lot of pull request, and then team or other person within the team end up spending the same amount of time, first of all, trying to understand the context of the pull request and then reviewing the code. And
Let me just fill in. Some people might not be as technical. A pull request is just a list of things you want to change. It's the changes to the code that you want to make all put in one bundle together. And I might write a bunch of code, bundle it all together and say, Vimal, go look at this. And then he opens it up, gets all the context, understands what it's all about, and says, Squirrel, you're an idiot, and try it again. That's what a pull request is all about. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there is a lot of to and from. So basically, a person who is reviewing the pull request adds some comments and everything, and then the other person who originally created the pull request goes back to the comment and then either answer the comment or to solve the problem. And what happens
all
is this
very asynchronous, right? So
yeah,
it might be we're in different time zones, we're going back and forth. There's a lot of delay here.
exactly. And the pull request takes sometime days, not if not hours or days to get merged into the main branch. Whatever you might be using, master branch, development branch, whatever it is. So that's where I started looking around. Okay, how other people are solving, and I came across a guy called Saha. He lives in Philippines, and he runs this little group called Modus Operandi. And so I became part of it. And I said, right, let's do it. What you do, and so what we are doing there. I was again new to this language called Rust, so we started learning Rust, but into mob programming format. And the idea was to learn mob programming as well as the language and build something. So because we are all in a different place, different geographically different place, we said, okay, let's do it. So we kind of set some time aside and we started doing it. Obviously, there are a number of tools which I will mention in a moment. But one of the things we did is 4 or 5 of us all get together over the weekend or during the weekdays. We kind of set up the time slot, maybe 2 hours or 3 hours initially. And we all develop this kind of whatever we kind of set out to do. So either learning or building something. And the number of benefits I realized is one is the collaboration was much better. Everybody was on the same page. There was no kind of people were all working in the same context. So that was one thing. The other one was knowledge sharing. So everybody is working together. Everybody was kind of on the same knowledge. And if anybody has any questions, the person can ask questions there and then, and they get the resolution happening while we are working on it. Okay. There was no pull request.
Vimal, can I stop you for just a second? I just want to make
Sure.
sure people are keeping up. Some folks may not actually really understand what we're talking about when we say mob programming. I love these benefits. I want you to keep going through that list. But before that, could you just describe the mechanics? If I were to walk into a room where people were doing this, or come to your house where you're obviously very comfortably at your standing desk there, if I were to stand behind you, what would I see you when you're doing that?
Okay. So mob programming is basically a format. So you have a team of 3 or 4 or 5 people. Okay, we take a turn, 10-minute turn. One person become driver, and the driver's job is to type the code. So we have one keyboard, big screen, everybody can see it. If you are working within the same room, we normally tend to work remotely, so we use the screen sharing essentially. But it's like you have a big screen, everybody kind of in the same room. One person become driver, and the rest of the people are navigator. But rather than everybody,
so if I'm the driver, if I'm the driver remotely, I'm at my keyboard. Everybody else is at their keyboard, but my keyboard is actually changing things, and my screen is on the screen. I might see do I see everybody else's faces, or are they invisible?
No, you don't get to see anybody's faces. You can if you want to, if you are working remotely, but you don't need to. So you are at the keyboard. There is only one keyboard, by the way. Nobody else has to have a keyboard or laptop, because the idea is one should be driving and the rest all are kind of discussing the idea, brainstorming it, and guiding the driver.
I get it. So it's not like Google Docs where sometimes I might edit along with someone else and I'm editing and they're changing my edits and we're on top of each other. Not like that. It's one person making the changes at a time.
Only one
Got
person
it. Okay, keep going.
He's the one who's typing. Okay.
Super. So what happens after the 10 minutes?
Yeah, so after the 10 minutes, the person who was driver, he would just go into the terminal and say mob next. And this tool which we are using called mob, that automatically push the changes into a separate GitHub branch. So it will create a mob branch essentially. It will push the changes into that branch, and the next person becomes a driver. So we are using a tool called basically mob timer.mob.sh, and it automatically pops up that who is the next. So it knows that how many people are participating into this mob programming, because we are working remotely, and it pops up that this person is the next. So that person becomes driver. and the other
So the
person
computer
becomes
is
part
sort
of
of
mob.
orchestrating all this. The way I've seen
That's
it
correct.
described before, there's a human being there with a stopwatch and going, "It's your turn." But the computer's doing it for us now.
That's correct. So
Got it. Keep going.
if I become a driver, I would say mob start, and my code automatically the mob tool itself downloads the code, pulls down the code, and I'm ready to basically start typing or start following the instruction from the navigator. And
There we
that's
go.
how it works.
This would be so useful in Google Docs. They ought to put it in Google Docs and Office 365 and things like that, because a lot of people who are here may not be programmers, but you can imagine when you're editing a document, you've probably had this. I'm editing here and somebody edits on top of me and I have to look at the comments and it gets very confusing. One thing that's really interesting about the mob approach is that it's one person making the changes at a time. There might be people shouting at that person saying, "Hey, change this or update that or do something." That part may get a little chaotic and mob-like, but the actual changes are all from one person. That, I think,
That's
could be
correct.
really simple. Lawyers should probably use this for updating contracts.
To be honest, tell you what, we have applied the same thing while updating the Google Doc as well. So I work with this different community. There is a Nix operating system, and I'm part of a Nix working group where we are kind of working on sometimes specifications or some proposal, and we still follow the mob because it's so much easier to working in a mob and kind of doing this hands off. While even writing the document, we use the same approach.
I never thought of that. Let me just bring in a couple questions, because now we've got the mechanics down. I want you to go back to the benefits, but let's keep in mind people's comments. We've got Roland, who says he's here to see how others are doing it. He's tried mob programming, found it useful sometimes and not others, and he wants to improve his own technique. So we'll definitely have some ideas there, and we'd love further questions, Roland, from you and everyone else. And Jovan, I hope I'm saying your name right, wants to know how frequently you adjust the CI/CD, meaning the continuous integration. So how often are you actually checking this in? Is this every 10 minutes it's getting checked in and tests are running, or is it that happens at the end? When does that happen, Vimal?
So when you are working on a particular item, for example, you are working on an idea or feature, developing a feature, right? While you are in mob, you run basically your unit test if you want to, but we don't.
You run them locally. The driver does that.
It doesn't run every 10 minutes because it's going to slow you down if you try to run.
You don't want to be waiting for the suite of tests that run for everything. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were telling us about some benefits. Go ahead and keep going with that. So you had so far better collaboration and shared knowledge. Say more about those or other benefits you've seen.
Well, primarily, if any new member joins the team, so we had a time where people leave and people join. We don't have a separate ramp up plan. That person gets ramped up, so he starts working with us. He might not be contributing to begin with, but he can be a driver, because ultimately when you are a driver, when you are typing ahead, you are just following the instruction, right? So that's one benefit.
And you can also ask questions as you're going. So it's kind of like pair programming, which is a good way to learn, but you're learning from everybody in the team at once. Got it. So all of this is like taking what programmers already do sometimes, which is kind of like sales ride-alongs or other things where people collaborate, and just saying, let's do it with 10 people instead of with 2. Okay, great. So onboarding gets better.
Smaller. So that is one benefit. The other benefit is if anybody gets stuck in one place, you know what are the problems. So problem gets shared as well, and solution gets shared as well. It's not like somebody is working on a problem in isolation and the other person in the team doesn't know how he solved the problem. All the issues you face, you solve in, and the
knowledge passes quickly.
That's correct. And one of the biggest benefit out of it is bus factor. You avoid the bus factor. I mean, say everybody within the team knows about it.
There you go. So let me just explain that for anyone who might not know. It's often called the bus factor. You can imagine why. I call it the lottery factor because I prefer to be positive. It just is. If Vimal knows everything about the database, and Vimal wins the lottery and goes to the beach, suddenly nobody knows the database, and that's not a good scene. That is not good for us being productive. So it's much better if everyone learns, and they would learn through this mob programming method. Great. Keep going. What else?
Okay. And one other benefit is, like, we call this term called full stack developer, where somebody knows everything. It's not necessarily
full stack,
always
absolutely.
It's not always necessary that everybody can. For example, in my early career, I was a backend developer, right? And to be honest,
me too.
Front end I really struggle with. But when you start working with the team in this kind of a collaborative environment, you keep learning, picking up the skills from the other people. Even if you don't know how to type the JavaScript, the navigator will be very, very kind of he will help you in terms of writing the code, and that's where you pick up other skills as well while working in a mob.
Got it. Now, you mentioned something there which seems really helpful. Well, two things, really. First, I might learn a new programming language this way. That's how you learned Rust. So this seems really helpful for team getting to know more things. I often say it's great when you can hire someone who doesn't know the programming language into your team. Why would you do that? Because they bring new ideas. So if you can get that ramp-up time better, that's fantastic. But the other thing I noticed is you mentioned this role of a navigator, and you might have said it before, but I'm not sure I picked it up. Is that a person who's kind of filtering the mob? Because one thing I'd be confused by as a driver is I've got 5 different people telling me 5 different things, and I'm trying to learn the programming language. So I might struggle. How's that work?
So that's why having a one navigator at a time is very, very crucial. So let's say we are
Okay.
a team of 4 people or 5 people working together. One person become driver. The next person who finished the driving, he becomes the navigator. And the rest of the people, he can discuss, so he can ask for the help or he can ask for the idea that, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And if the navigator said something which somebody else is contradicting, people can chip in, but ideally navigator is the one who should be really giving the instruction.
Got it. So that person is kind of like a marshal or a filterer, kind of brings the group's view together and says, okay, Vimal, you wait a minute. Okay, Roland, you tell us your view. Okay, well, Roland, we can't do that yet. Javon, okay, Javon knows, and then tells the driver, go type this. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's the
I
way
get
to
it.
do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a great question from Jovan, and I'll get to other questions too, but I just wanted to grab this one because I think it's relevant to getting these benefits. What do you need to have? So if you say, great, I'm interested in this, I'd like to try it, what do you need?
You do nothing, to be honest. I mean, so you just start
Okay.
working as a mob, set some ground rules. So ground rules are like I said, one person become driver, the other person become the rest of the people becomes the part of the mob, and one is navigator, and you just follow it. You learn as a team. I mean, so every like people have a different definition of agile. Say agile should be this way and that way. Similarly, every mob is different. You just set up your ground rule. You evolve as a team, but you work together, and that's how it is. There are
Understood.
no ground rules.
Okay. And do I need any tools? It sounds like there are some software tools that help. Do I need those, or can I just
Well,
start
if
with
you are
a
working
stopwatch
remotely,
and a strong will?
yeah, so if you are working remotely, then yes, it would be good to use tools. And one of the tools is called mob.sh. You can search for it. I'll share the link. Let me just share it here. All the
Okay.
tools.
Yeah. If you put it in a comment, I can bring it up on the screen.
Yes, I'll do that.
And for those who are less technical, don't worry about the dots and the details and the shell scripts and things like that. These are the things that you would give your team. But these things are all, I think, open source. These aren't things you have to pay for. You don't need to go have fancy training, get a certificate, all that kind of stuff. This is something your team could try. And we'll talk more about what the indicators are. When is this a good idea? When is it a bad idea? That's Roland's question, I know. But Vimal's putting his comment up.
I've done it in the private chat. Have you seen it?
Oh, it's in the private, so then I can't use it. So that's okay. That's fine. I'll copy it over. That's fine. No, I got it. We have a private chat that we use, but for me and Vimal to talk to each other. But we want to talk to all of you, so let's bring that up. If I do that, and I don't think we got all of the comments. So mob.sh, there it is. So that's got the first line there has the website to go to.
Yeah. So the mob.sh is a tool to kind of a pass handover via Git. It basically automatically commits into Git and create a branch and everything. You start when you start new feature, you start mob start. Git finish is for basically screen sharing and the communication video tool. And the last one is mob timer, which basically keeps the track of the time, and every 10 minutes it flags up.
That's the stopwatch. Fantastic. We have another question from Jovan. How frequently do you use mob programming? So I think this might get exhausting. I always got exhausted when I would pair program with 2 people, so sort of a 2-person mob. And I would always tell my engineers, look, you got to take a lot of breaks when you do this because you're really intense. You know, you don't get a break to stare out the window or something. You're always kind of on. Do you find the same with mob programming? Is it more relaxing? How much can you do it?
We started with kind of a 2 times a week, 2 hours. So basically 4 hours during the week. Now we are doing it 4 times a week. So essentially 4 times a week, 2 hours.
Still for 2 hours, or do you do it for longer?
That 2 hours. 2 hours is
for
I think
the 2 hours.
that's
Got
the
it.
time. Yeah, but we kind
So
of take
for
a
the rest
break.
of the workday, people are working on their own,
That's
using what
correct.
they've learned, and then they come together maybe to work on a sticky problem or to learn something new for 2 hours almost every day, I think is what I heard you
Yeah,
say.
yeah, and
Nice.
we take a break
Okay.
after every hour.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I think that's super important because I would have new people to pair programming. And I have to imagine mob programming is even more so. It's very very tiring because it's a huge cognitive load. Your brain works very hard to keep track of the person and the navigation and the ideas and the new things coming in and maybe the new programming language or whatever else you're doing, the new system, the new tools. So it's a lot to do, and I had a few people get ill as a result of trying too much. They also got ill because they sat near somebody else. This was before COVID, and so you'd sit near someone and you weren't wearing a mask or anything. So diseases passed more frequently. I don't know whether that happens with, certainly not going to happen remotely. So
No.
very good question, Jovan. Please keep them coming. We have some other questions and comments. What do we have? Oh, so Roland says, it's too long to put up here, but I'll just read it out. He says he tried applying mob programming to everything for knowledge sharing. And then he found it worked better for complex and chaotic situations. He's using language from something called Cynefin here, but you can imagine complex, difficult things where nobody really knows what to do. And it worked better in those situations than in clear or complicated ones where there's kind of a recipe book where you could look up what to do. Yeah, they don't require clear and complicated situations don't require as much debate. Vimal, what do you think about that? Does that match your experience? You see it
I
differently?
think that's a very good point. When you are working with a kind of a complicated problem, one of the observations that I kind of came to realize was in the when I used to work in not non-mob format, you used to do a lot of meetings to discuss complicated things. Then you come out
Yes.
of
Hey, good
meeting,
point.
you come out of your meeting, and then you start to implement the solution. So there is
And
a
then you find out
disconnect.
all the things that you didn't know in the meeting.
So
Because
there is a
in the
disconnect
meeting, you
between the
said, oh, it
meeting
works like this. And you look at the
and
code,
what
it
you
doesn't work
do.
like that.
And
Of
then
course.
what happens is you end up doing a lot of meetings and implementation. Whereas in the
Yep.
mob,
And then meetings about the meetings because the implementation didn't work. Yes. I see. Okay. This seems like a huge benefit.
so this is a very very good point, and yeah, thank you for bringing it up, Roland. I think it's a very very good way of working on the complicated solutions.
Indeed, and it's good to hear, Vimal, that what you're not trying to do is mob programming all day, every day. Not only because it's exhausting, but because a lot of things just really wouldn't benefit if it's a simple thing. We're going to do something we've done many times before and update the same code in a similar way. Don't need a mob to tell you how to do that. But man, you're doing something new, complex, difficult vendor or integration, some new requirement, something new about your customers you didn't know before. All of that's in the complex domain. That's going to be a place where mobs are really going to help you. Cool. All right. Very, very helpful. Vimal, let me ask you this. When would you say that mob programming would be helpful? What kind of industry or what kind of problem? We've already said complex or chaotic in Cynefin terms, but I'm just wondering what would be an indicator that, hey, this would be a good one for mobbing?
I think when you are working with a domain which is very complex, or when you are working with something which is unknown, where you require a lot of collaboration, where you require a lot of sharing the ideas, and kind of require people from multiple skills. So it's not like all the programmer do more programming. No, even a person with the domain expertise, he can join as well. He may not be typing. Do not need to type, but he can still share his domain expertise. He can still add the value into the mob. So it's when you are working with a problem where you have a lot of unknowns, I think mob programming works well.
There you go. Excellent. Well, I certainly can agree with that. Now, I'm going to ask another related question, but we've just got a flood of good questions coming in. I want to get them up on the screen before they scroll away. So Jovan asks another good one. Mob programming is in a way live refinement and coding session combined. Absolutely. And code review as well. And Jovan says, hey, what about QA? How about the people who do the tests? They might build automated tests. They might do manual testing. They might do a mix of both. Do those people show up in the mob? And how about people like designers? There's lots of folks who work with engineers. Are they in the mob or not?
They certainly join the mob as well. I'm saying particularly QA, like I said earlier, like BA, QA and BA can join the team, and they add their value because you are working, developing something together jointly. So having them part of the team helps as well. And maybe what happens is when you are about to finish your mob, say, okay, you're done with the feature and you want to fire a command mob done. Before you do that, you can maybe have another 10-minute slot and ask QA to become the driver. And the rest of the team kind of observe what he does, what he tests, and even have their own input as well. So I think it's a very good way of even sharing some of the QA skills with the development team and QA
Oh,
observing
so
as well what
important.
developers are doing.
Yeah, I had a wonderful QA person that I trained up. He's still in the community, and I hear from him regularly. He's a really wonderful chap named Cedric. And one of the things he did was to actually, because we didn't have a mob, we didn't have this idea yet. And so he created a tick list on a laminated piece of paper. So it was laminated. You could use it again and again, and you would tick off which things you had tested. In his case, it was different human languages because they supported a huge number of human languages in their system. And there were all kinds of weird words, Hebrew's backwards and Japanese goes from top to bottom and other strange and wonderful things. And he had this list and he said, have you tried all these words in the system? And if you hadn't tried them, you didn't get to merge your code. So I can imagine that being much faster and more efficient because people would say, well, why is this word on the list? Hey, well, what do you mean Hebrew's backwards? Right to left? I never knew that. People learn all kinds of things. They might just not have known for whatever reason. They're not experts in the domain from QA. And the best QA people like Cedric are just amazing at thinking up stuff that you and I would never break. I had one who her screensaver was, if it ain't broke, break it. And she was great at breaking anything. And we learned so much from her way of thinking about what the system could or should do and how people could stress it. So I think big vote there from both me and Vimal, Jovan. Get the QA folks, the designers, get other people in the room because those ideas are going to be really valuable to the mob. They're going to get filtered down to the navigator who will then say, wait a minute, I better handle somebody putting in. I remember another good one we had. It was a financial system dealing with the stock exchange, and people were the QA said, we have to test if people buy a negative number of shares. I said, how can you buy a negative number of anything? What are you talking about? Well, it turns out they do short selling, right? And we all heard about that. I didn't know about it at the time, but suddenly somebody's putting in -5. Well, of course the system crashed. We never thought of buying -5 of anything, but it was the way they sold. It was the way they got rid of some of their holding. And of course we had to handle that. And we never knew until the QA person came along and said, no, negatives are important. You need to test for that. So tremendous value here. Really great question, Jovan. And please do include, be broad in your mob design. Excellent. Vimal, I'm going to ask you another tough question. So when would you not use mob programming? So one place we talked about before is if it was a pretty simple thing, we're not really going to benefit. But I'm thinking of other times. Is there times when it's not safe? Or are there times when the team's not ready for it? But when would you say not to use it?
Well, one of the things, like you already said, is that sometimes doing pair programming or mob programming is quite exhausting. Right? You get exhaustion, right? So that's one of the things that you don't want to do it for the entire 8 hours or 6 hours a day. Okay.
Absolutely.
The other one is there are sometimes just mundane tasks. I mean, so you just want to get on with the things and crack on with simple stuff. Really, you can all work in kind of on your own desk and do it. So these are the two situations I can really think of. I mean, say otherwise, if you are working with some complex problem, mob is really, really useful.
Fantastic. Let me suggest two others, and you may disagree with me, Vimal. That would be really good. And people who are here making comments, we have another really good one from Connell coming up. Feel free to disagree with both me and Vimal or one of us. But I can think of two other cases. One is if I were building a nuclear power plant. There would be parts where I would really want a mob. I want as many people looking at the control rods as possible, right? What could possibly make this thing melt down? Then a mob, I think, might be really useful. But there might be other places where there's super highly specialized knowledge and other people just really aren't going to contribute much. I certainly wouldn't have much to say about the design of a spent fuel rod pool, right? That's a really good thing. I want people who know what they're doing to touch that. You don't want me in the room because I won't add anything. So that's one that I thought of. And then the other, it slipped my mind actually, but tell me, Vimal, what do you think about my other example? So someplace where there's super specialist knowledge. Is that a place where mobbing would help? Is there a way to make it useful or is it not going to be helpful there?
Well, in my mind, it depends. If you want to share the knowledge, if you want to build that expertise, not just kind of having one with superficiality person, if you want to share it, then doing it with the mob helps. But if it is kind of very much a secretive knowledge and you really want to kind of keep it very, very close, then yes, it applies. So it depends on the situation.
That is very sensible. I can't argue. I have one other limitation. It'll come back to me. I don't remember what it is. We got too many good questions. Let's see if we can deal with some of those. So we have Connell, old friend of mine, client, and great person, really good technical leader. He says, we did mob reviews every week or so. So I think he's talking about not coding, but reviewing code. As well as the direct benefits of new code value. We also found it was a good way to break up the day, I bet. Strengthen the team as they would collaborate and play in this interesting context. Well, I can certainly attest to that. That's something I've seen both with pairing and mobbing. You get more people working together, they have a faster communication, they can align better together. Vimal, what are your thoughts on the, that approach?
I think that's a good way. I'm saying that's obviously the step toward the mobbing. I would still say there is still a context, kind of a disconnectivity between when you are doing things and when you are reviewing things. It may happen that when you are developing a particular feature, when you're writing something, you have a certain context, and maybe when you are into mob review, you might kind of miss some of those contexts. You might not always have those things in mind. So it's a good way of doing it, but probably you don't need to do the review if you are working together while developing the feature.
There you go. Fantastic. We have Javon who weighs in and says, hardcore Scrum folks will start spinning in circles. They'll go crazy if you introduce a specialist. I think sometimes you have a specialist, so I think maybe we should help them to spin a little bit less. I don't mind having a specialist in the team. What you do want is for that specialist to share the knowledge. Mobbing would be a great way to do that. Good stuff. We have someone else. Now, I'm not sure how to say this name, so if I murder your name, I'm so sorry. Just let us know how to say it. Sneha, I think, might be the way you say it. And Sneha says, if we need to do context switching, so we have been doing one type of thing, we're doing something else. You can peel off one person from the mob, and that person can kind of separate from the group. It's almost like a school of fish, and a couple fish go off to check out, is there more food over here? So one person goes off, looks into something, and the rest keeps going on the main task. And the good thing is, because you have kind of different fish who can work on it, you can send a couple off to do something, but you haven't lost the ability of the main school to continue. Very nice observation, Sneha. I hope I'm saying your name right. Fantastic, good stuff. Really good discussion we've got going here. This is what we do in the squadron: is we all learn from each other. Vimal, go ahead. Yeah, please.
I wanted to make one point in that context, and that is why initially when we started doing mob programming, what used to happen was we didn't have any kind of a one navigator, so entire team was kind of playing the role of navigator.
Oh, and everybody's trying to type. Were they elbowing each other out of the way? Let me type.
They were very considerate, so we were not bombarding the driver, but that was the case. And one thing we observe is that some people were very, very inactive. And they just kind of, depending on how their personality, they just are shy, they're not taking part, or they're not speaking out. And the person with the kind of strong personality, they just always play the role of navigator or the driver.
This is very important. Yes.
So this was one of the things we learned, and that's where we decided that rather than letting the entire rest of the mob become a navigator, we should have a kind of one person need to become navigator in the rotation as well, and that really helped kind of having a full participation into the mob programming.
I like it. And one of the key skills for that navigator is the knowledge of processes like joint design that I talk about, which are involving are aimed at getting involvement from everybody in the group. And you often will have people who are more junior, or whose face looks different from my face, or whose skin color is different, or whose background is different, whose gender is different. And people like that sometimes feel intimidated by people, frankly, who look like me, who are very confident and say, okay, great, I know the right answer. And Vimal is sitting there saying, Squirrel's wrong, but he sounds really confident. And, in my culture, that's not something we do, or, I wasn't raised to do that. And if you actually actively go out to them and say, hang on, so Squirrel, you shut up for a while. Let's hear from Vimal. That can be a really effective thing to do. You need a good facilitator. You need somebody with good balance, with good emotional presence, who can step in and say, hang on, we're only hearing from this type of person. We're only hearing this type of feedback. Let's stop for a bit and let's have somebody else be the navigator. Really important, but it's an art, not a science to do that well.
Correct. And the rest of the team becomes very, very supportive to the person. So even though navigator may not know everything, He can always seek help from the other, but at least you will see him participating into it. He will become taking a lead and navigating it. So
Yep.
that's one thing we noticed.
And you don't want to force somebody to do that. Some people just really feel uncomfortable there. And especially if I'm not knowledgeable, I may benefit a huge amount from listening. And that's a good thing to do. But what we don't want is for me to feel I can't participate. I'm not smart enough. I'm too junior. I don't know this language, or I don't know something. You want people to feel comfortable if they have a contribution to make it, and to be welcome to be silent as well. Both are good. And Sneha says this happens a lot with us. So I imagine Sneha might have been in this situation on either side. And can't emphasize enough how important it is to get everybody participating. And that's even more cognitive load, right? The person who's being the navigator and having to bring everybody in and so on, that person has to work really hard. Give them an extra big lunch. Good. So we have Jovan jumping in and saying you'd want a product manager or a scrum master, I guess, in the mob as well. Vimal, what's your thought on that? Do we need those roles? Can we get by without them? Are they in the way or helpful?
I think it depends on the team dynamic. I mean, so far I haven't seen the need of them having to part of it. If they want to take part, they will be one of the participant of the mob rather than playing a role of PM or Scrum Master. Because ultimately it's team dynamics. If team is gelling very well with each other, you don't need that. You don't have to anybody kind of be kind of monitoring. Team is working. It's a team dynamics.
There you go. Very good point. And I think that's another one for delicate balance, building trust with your team, because it can be very easy for someone to be overbearing. And in any group situation, you can have someone who says, right, okay, everybody, listen to me. I'm Squirrel. I know I have all the answers. Vimal, you do this and somebody else do that. That's quite damaging. And very easy to fall into, especially if that's the habit, if that's the culture of the company, to have a director in that way. And of course, good product managers and good Scrum Masters aren't like that at all. So you can be a really effective product manager who's great at bringing out those ideas, bringing in the team, making sure that the communication is good. If you're that kind of person, you're welcome in the mob. If your goal is take over and do things my way, this isn't going to work so well for you. Probably a mob would not be the right way to you need an army, not a mob in that case. You need them saluting. But this isn't about that. Let's avoid that. Good stuff. Vimal, any other thoughts? Anything that we haven't covered so far? We've got all the things in my notes, plus a bunch of new learning for me. What else haven't we covered? And please, this is the time for more questions as well. So we want to cover your questions. Please put them in the comments.
The point I kind of made a note and I wanted to share is basically one thing it does, it reduces the lead time. If there is kind of there is no need to have followed any separate process, for example, code review or any kind of handoff, because things are developing in the same, right? I already talked about the shared knowledge. So as I said, no bus factor, or in your terms, you use a
lottery factor. Yep, whatever we call it. Yep.
Yeah. Again, you are start contributing. One other thing we learned. I'm saying this came from the frustration. So whenever a new person joins, and we were all working remotely, we end up spending a lot of time helping him during the mob, like setting up his machine. Like he doesn't have certain library installed, or he doesn't have certain tool installed, and you can see that there is a frustration. And one outcome out of it is we learn that we should actually automate the developer environment setup. So we kind of use Nix operating system in order to be able to kind of set everything up. And that actually helps as well. So anybody new joins, just with one command, everything is set up for him. So that was another outcome. You learn from your kind of feedback that you need to have a good developer experience, good developer setup, and it should be ready with just one command, or maybe by a Docker environment or something really.
Very important one there is the seamlessness of development is really important. You don't want someone to say, okay, well, now I need to take 17 different steps in order to have everything set up right and the right check-ins and the right authentication. You want to be able to go, okay, let's just get started, because any friction is going to slow down the whole mob. And suddenly you get, instead of greater efficiency and more collaboration, you get a whole bunch of people sitting around. That's about as demoralizing and unproductive as you can get. So you definitely want to avoid that. Very good point.
And the code was kind of very much like everybody was on the same page in terms of code quality, following the same coding standard, because it's now you are sharing your idea. You are saying that this is how we should follow, and it was very idiomatic as well.
Very nice. Okay. And we have Steve Tukey, who's always making fantastic comments in the forum and in our events. Heuristic used for his mobs. No idea goes into the computer unless it's through someone else's hands. So it might be in my brain, but I'm not the one who types it. It has to go through someone else. Any heuristics that you use, Vimal, when you're doing this?
I think Steve has summarized it really, really very well. That's the idea.
Excellent. Fantastic. And Steve, as usual, has lots of good ideas. So he also suggests a place you can look for different roles in a mob. Okay. So we won't go into that in depth because we won't read this article right this moment, but please have a look at anything Tukey suggests is always worth looking at. This will be on the forum as well. So I'm just making a little note to get Tukey's link. Because on the forum there'll be a follow-up post with some of these ideas and further thoughts, things we didn't get to or we want to cover more, and that will be in there. Of course, it's also in the let's see, so that's on LinkedIn. So if you want to find that link, you can go look on the LinkedIn version of this event where the links will all be there and clickable. Good stuff. I don't see any more questions, so I'm assuming that we're where we need to be. Throw in a final question if you want to get to one. But I think, Vimal, we've very efficiently covered lots of fantastic topics. Thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your knowledge. This is what the squadron's about. We get people who are doing interesting things to come and talk to us about how they do it, to learn from them, and we all get together and discuss, does that work for us? How do we use it? Where can it make our technology more effective, whether we're technologists or not? Really great stuff. Vimal, I'm going to put up your LinkedIn. Is that the best place for people to find you if they want to ask you more questions?
Yeah, certainly.
Fantastic. Well, let me put that up here so that if you're interested in talking more to Vimal, you can do that on the Squirrel Squadron forum, of course, because he's there commenting. But you can also go and find Vimal himself on his LinkedIn. If you're interested in joining the Squirrel Squadron, so you might have just come along and said, what's this crazy stuff? And who's this insane person? And what are they talking about? So the way to get in touch with me and get on the forum and do all these good things is with the Squirrel Squadron, which is my, as I say, community of tech and non-tech people working together. So you can join that. It's all free. It's my way of giving back because I've learned so much from so many people that I really want to do that for my community. And of course, meet more interesting people just like Vimal. And I didn't know you outside the squadron, Vimal, but I'm so glad that we got together thanks to the squadron. We have more and more of those
things. Thank you very
much
for giving me this platform. Thank
happening
you.
all the time. Oh yeah, it's lots of fun. Excellent stuff. And I think we just have people saying thanks and awesome session. I agree. So much learning and really fun. We'll see you again. We're taking an Easter break next week, but the week after that, I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the leading geeks, but have a look on Squirrel Squadron. You'll see a whole bunch of different events. And come to Krakow if you can, or sign up for the recording. That's going to be one really interesting keynote speech all about why Scrum and sprints and so on are not the solution. You don't need those. And if you're wondering why, have a look at Squirrel Squadron and see what's happening there. Come along to the event or sign up for the recording. Wonderful. I'll see you folks in a couple weeks. Have a fantastic Easter. And thanks again, Vimal.
Thank you. Have a good Easter. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.
Right.